This here is the crown jewel of my camera collection, and I actually nickname it the Beast. It's the most expensive piece of camera gear I own, and it's actually even more expensive than my camera itself. It's my 100 to 400mm telephoto lens. And in this video, I'm going to show you whether or not this lens is worth its hefty price tag and if it's actually a beneficial piece of gear to add to your kit. Now, I'm going to be talking about my Sony 100 to 400 G Master lens, but a lot of this is going to apply to any 100 to 400mm lens, whether it's a Canon, a Nikon, a Sigma, or whatever other brand. I've owned this lens for almost 3.5 years now, and I've shot thousands of photos with it and also used it for some video work. So I've really put this thing through its paces. And there's a lot that I like about this lens, but also some things that I wish it would do better, and we'll talk about that by the end of the video. As you would expect from a G Master lens, the build quality of this thing is excellent. It's weather sealed to protect it from dust and moisture, and overall it just feels very solid and durable. This lens weighs nearly 1.4 kilograms, and it's definitely not small. Now, the size and weight of this Sony lens is similar to most other 100 to 400 lenses, so outdoor photographers carrying their gear in a backpack will certainly think twice when packing this thing for a hike. The Sony 100 to 400 features fantastic stabilization or optical steady shot. You can turn it on or off via this switch, which also overrides the built-in IBIS of your camera. There are also two stabilization mode switches. When set to mode 1, you get both vertical and horizontal stabilization, and when you set it to mode 2, you only get the vertical stabilization, so when you're panning horizontally, your images will still be very sharp, and this is great, for example, when you're doing panning shots. There are also 3 programmable buttons located between the focus and zoom ring controls, all of which can be customized in the camera menu for pretty much any function you would like. The focusing abilities of this lens are outstanding. It's incredibly fast and accurate, but also very silent, making it a great option for video shooters as well. The lens has no issues with tracking subjects that are moving around very fast when you're shooting in continuous focus mode. It had no trouble keeping track of these tiny, speedy little hummingbirds. So if you enjoy shooting wildlife, this lens will most definitely have you covered. Now, another thing that you would expect from a lens in this price range is excellent sharpness. And even though I haven't done any specific sharpness tests, I can just go off my images and tell you that they are pin sharp. Have a look at these shots and the details captured by this lens. These are shot on my Sony a7 Mark III, a 24 megapixel camera, and even when cropping in, the detail is amazing. Now let's talk about why you would even want this lens and what it can possibly do for your photography or videography. The most obvious reason is that it allows you to shoot things that are really far away. This can be great when you can't physically get closer to certain subjects because you might be on top of a mountain or on the other side of a lake or on a different planet. But it's also great when you don't want to scare away your subject by coming too close. So even though a telephoto lens like this is mostly catered towards sports or wildlife photography, it can also be incredibly valuable for landscape, outdoor, or even macro photography. The Sony 100 to 400mm has a minimum focus distance of 98 centimeters and a maximum magnification ratio of 0.35. So it can produce some quality macro-like images, and paired with that amazing sharpness, the results are quite impressive. In landscape or outdoor photography, a 100 to 400mm opens up a whole new world of photographic opportunities. It has the ability to create these unique and almost cinematic-like photos. Because this is quite an uncommon focal range, you will most definitely end up with much more extraordinary photos from a certain location. This extensive zoom range allows you to pick out several different compositions from one location. You can create a bunch of separate frames from one single landscape scene, and that is just extremely powerful. But it can also create simplicity in complicated scenes and allow you to create more simple and abstract shots simply by zooming in far enough. This way you are excluding things that could be distracting from your frame and putting the emphasis and focus much more on your subject. The long focal length of a 100 to 400 lens also produces a very dramatic compression effect in your images, which is probably one of the main reasons why I love this lens so much. This compression effect creates the impression that things in the distance appear larger than they actually are. It looks as if the background has been pulled closer to your subject, and this compression effect can also help separate your subject from a possibly busy background. If we compare these shots at different focal lengths, you can tell that the further we zoom in, the more it creates a unique looking shot. It separates the subject from the background beautifully with a smooth, creamy background, and it just looks stunning. Okay, so it's obvious that I really love the 100 to 400 millimeter lens, and I really believe that most of you will probably love it too. But there are a few drawbacks to this lens. The Sony 100 to 400 has a variable aperture of f4.5 at 100 millimeters and f5.6 from 164 to 400 millimeters. And so do most other 100 to 400 millimeter lenses. So it's not the most ideal lens for any type of low light work. And especially at the longer end of the focal range, it can have some difficulties focusing in low light situations. On the other hand, the optical stabilization of the Sony lens does help a lot in darker environments. It reduces the camera shake quite a lot, allowing you to slow down your shutter speed and still get nice and sharp images of still subjects. I've been able to get some pretty sharp images at very slow shutter speeds because of that optical stabilization. One thing I mentioned before is the size and weight of this lens. At 1.4 kilograms, you'll definitely notice it when you're carrying this thing around in a backpack. A lot of times when I'm packing my camera bag for a hike, for example, I have to really consider whether or not I want to bring this lens. I usually don't have any regrets when I do bring it, but you know, it's something you have to keep in mind, especially if you are more of a minimalist, lightweight backpack kind of person. This might not be a good fit for you. It's also quite expensive, so this is probably not a lens you're gonna get when you're just starting out, unless you just have a bunch of money laying around. There are, however, cheaper third-party options like the Sigma or Tamron version. They tend to have fewer of the premium options that you would see on the major brand ones, but they offer an affordable alternative if you just want to try your hand at telephoto photography. And that actually brings me to another point, and that is that you kind of have to get used to using a lens like a 100 to 400 millimeter. You have to look at a scene in a different way, scan your surroundings for little details, and see more than just the big picture. Because you're not used to seeing or thinking at 400 millimeters, it's good to go a little bit slower and to just look for little areas in a landscape that draw your attention. So it's not really a disadvantage, but more of a learning curve. Now, another thing that I briefly want to touch on is probably the biggest competitor of this lens, and that is the 70 to 200 millimeter. This is probably the most popular telephoto lens out there, and if you would combine it with a 2x teleconverter, you'd also get that 400 millimeters reach. So why not get that one? Well, I honestly don't know for sure. Obviously, the cost of the teleconverter increases the total cost of your setup. And there are also other things to consider, like for example, teleconverters supposedly reducing the sharpness and autofocus capabilities of your lens. There are of course a number of other more individual things that could determine your choice between the two, but as you can tell, my choice at the time was the 100 to 400 millimeter, and I haven't had any regrets about it. This is by far my favorite lens in my camera bag, and it's been incredibly useful in all types of photography or video situations. The build quality, image quality, and range of this thing just makes it an amazing piece of camera gear. But I'm interested to know, what do you guys think? Which lens would you prefer? The 70 to 200 or the 100 to 400? And if you own one or the other, why did you choose that one? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!